The OC said I need a beer fridge, and if they get here and there is not a beer fridge under my desk, there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah, now you're just making up. All right, let's do a podcast.
Okay, here we go. Today is Monday, April 6th, 2015, and this is episode 112 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, good evening, Jerry. So how are you tonight, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. It's Monday instead of Sunday, which is our normal recording night, but Easter things and all that for those who celebrate.
That's right. That's right.
So,
the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers. All right, so first order of business is, as we've talked about the last couple of episodes, we are giving away a ticket to the High Tech Crime Investigation Association Conference, which is being held in Orlando, Florida from August 30th through September 2nd of 2015. This ticket is worth $595. But if you don't win the ticket, you can still use the discount code Defensive Security and get 10% off, which is $60. That's pretty good.
mm-hmm.
So to win the ticket, we are asking our listeners to tweet us with our Twitter handle at DefensiveSec between April 1st.
Well, was it to tweet us or mention us?
Mention us. Either way.
Yes.
Either way.
Because, you might be telling your friends about how cool we are.
That's true.
As opposed to telling us how cool we are.
Because we already know.
And we're humble.
True.
Carry on.
True. So yes, actually, I know. I don't know if you figured it out yet, but I'm definitely intending to go to the High Tech Crime Investigation Association conference. So
I like it.
I
got approval from the current employer to go to DerbyCon. So next I'll work on that.
Okay. Good deal.
Because it does look like a cool conference.
It does. It definitely does. So moving on, next order of business. I'm not going to mention this too many more times, but we have a Patreon campaign going, and for those of you who have donated, I am really kind of taken aback. I really appreciate everybody's generosity, and if you haven't donated and feel like donating, you can donate at patreon.com/defensivesec.
Yeah, seriously, you guys have overwhelmed us with generosity, and really, really, really do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Definitely. All right, so moving on to stories. Our first story tonight comes from databreachtoday.com, and the title is "New Malware Attack Prey on Banks." So this is a pretty interesting story. Normally banking Trojans are becoming kind of passé, but the deal here is this particular banking Trojan is targeting commercial banking customers. And what's really interesting about it is some of the social engineering tricks it uses. So it does some of the normal man in the browser type shenanigans. Right, but instead of the typical way of trying to fool you, what it instead does is it detects that you're trying to visit a bank, and then it displays an error message that the site is down for maintenance, and it gives you a number to call, to complete your banking transaction, and the scammers here actually set up a call center.
Which definitely raises their risk level.
Absolutely,
you would think.
I wonder if this is kind of the next evolution of the Windows call center or the Windows support.
Yeah, it's pretty ballsy.
Absolutely, but is apparently not a very clear understanding of how this thing propagates. But it's presumed that it is coming in via social engineering or phishing types of attacks through email. But I think last I saw, the detection for this last variant, which by the way is called Dyer, if I didn't say it before, is pretty spotty. There's not a lot of support or detection for it. So, this is something that I've been on the drum about quite a lot, particularly in the smaller companies. But I guess it's probably really important for everybody, all size organizations, is to really think about how you isolate those really sensitive assets that are performing sensitive things. And I've talked to this, I made this point with a number of people recently, that especially for a banking type application, you probably want to dedicate a system for that, where you don't have people checking email and browsing the internet, because I don't think their losses are covered.
What about spinning up a static VM for that sort of stuff that you take a snapshot and restore back to no good state when you're done with that session?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways to accomplish it, but yeah, I mean, you have to do some. I mean, you don't have to do anything, right? You can be one of these victims, right? But
right.
Yeah, I think you have to do something.
This show is about solutions.
That's right. That's right. But I think you're absolutely right. I will tell you that my, I think what you described is another level of maturity. But one thing I've seen a lot of people do is kind of think about that type of model backwards, where they'll think about, well, okay, I'll install VirtualBox, right, and I'll do my banking inside a VM, and then I'll surf porn and download wares and whatever else on my on my actual system. That's really not a great way to go about it, because if you get a rat, they can control your VM. So
true, we're raising the bar. Everything can have holes poked in it. Everything can be defeated. But I'm just trying to figure out what's viable and reasonable, right? I can envision having a secretary or having a business analyst or somebody who's not very technical savvy, giving them a document that says, okay, double click on VM Workstation, open this thing up, start this up, do your thing, here's your link for it, and then shut it down. I could envision that as viable.
And it would, I think it would definitely raise the bar, like you said.
I think that's probably more viable than having dedicated machines that get ignored or misused or...
Probably so.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing I want to say, too, is that what's interesting about this targeting commercial banking is commercial banking customers don't have the same fraud protections as personal banking does.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And
typically have higher balances and such.
Right. The transaction costs or the transaction amounts are a lot higher, so they don't have to commit as many fraudulent acts, I guess, to make the same amount of money. I have to wonder if there's another interesting dynamic to this, that the banks probably aren't as incentivized to go fix this problem as they are on the consumer banking side.
Yeah.
So
it's where the money is, right? I think we're going to continue to see a rise in this. We're seeing all sorts of interesting attacks against commercial banking entities right now.
That's for sure. Got to go where the money is. All right, our next story, also from Data Breach Today, and the title is Cyber Attacks Target Energy Firms. Kind of short and sweet title. There is a newly discovered piece of malware called Laziak, I guess is how you would say it, which appears to be targeting the energy and gas sector companies primarily in the Middle East. And as far as we can tell, it's really a reconnaissance type piece of malware, which can eventually be used to install other pieces of malware like Zeus or CyberRat. But the hypothesis put forward by this is that it's probably being deployed by a nation state, or let's see, they actually have a list here, right?
Do we need like a little bumper sound for whenever we say nation state?
No, well, so I think this is a little more responsible than we normally see.
All
so
right.
so it says, which suggests corporate espionage, corporate espionage on the part of competitors, nation states, or mercenaries. And I guess the only group that really excludes are, hacktivists?
Bored kids in the basement.
Yeah.
Um,
It's pretty all-encompassing, I guess. But, so this, here's where this one goes a little interesting for me. Keep in mind, this was a pretty recent attack, like, fourth quarter of last year through the early part of 2015. Its method of propagation, or its method of infection, is leveraging an exploit in a 3-year-old Microsoft Office vulnerability, or Microsoft Office package.
awesome.
Totally awesome. I can't find the quote right now, but the author made some kind of wisecrack that said, the attackers clearly understand the lack of investment in software of this particular sector. In their Office suite. So
Yeah. Well, I think this sort of talks to this concept of steady state. I think there are certain industries that just don't have the culture of patching. If it doesn't broke, don't fix it. Leave it alone. It's scary to patch stuff.
No, you're clearly right. We have some objective evidence right here.
But we have evolved past that. I think in terms of computing. Especially hell, my thermostat had a patch the other day. We were having this discussion with a buddy of ours who probably would not like us talking about this, but he was kind of educating us on the world of biomedical devices that are certified for a specific OS version and a specific patch, and you cannot touch it. I get it, I understand, but I also think that is not viable long term. If you're designing a brand new medical device today and you don't build in the concept of patching for these sorts of things, it almost seems irresponsible to me. But at the same time, the flip side is, look, we certified it for a certain version, we did all of our testing. For us to patch, we're going to have to do all this regression testing and recertify for safety of life every single patch. No, that's not viable either. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place on that one. And I don't know the answer. But at the end of the day, we can't just not patch. I understand that there's a lot of challenges with that, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for folks who don't patch unless it's kind of like a biomedical device that's forced to be a certain version.
Yeah, I think this is clearly a very different situation. It appears to be. I certainly don't know which specific companies were involved nor the details, but it certainly seems like a situation where they didn't renew their enterprise agreement, or they bought a point version of Office and they just kind of let it be.
Yeah, which I think is pretty common, actually. I think it's sadly common. But you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, I have to wonder if they had patched and these attackers were, in fact, really specifically interested in compromising these people. Would we be reading about some other method of entry?
Well, that's a very good point. and that is something to consider, right? This is like the same problem you have with the pen test. The pen test found one, in theory. Most pen tests find one point of vulnerability that you address. So that's a very interesting question, a very interesting speculation. If this particular vulnerability had been closed, what other vulnerabilities did that particular attacker have in their toolkit that they could have pulled out? And you're right, we don't know. They could have had O-days that they were willing to burn, and we don't know.
Right.
So then it becomes, is there a viable economic cost to making them burn O-days?
I mean, I think that's what you have, right? So if you keep yourself patched and up to date, and you have otherwise good hygiene, then you kind of force them into that position.
In theory, or
In theory.
social engineering and other
Yeah,
phishing techniques and such. But
right.
the other thing, and we've talked about this before, is, all right, so if you're not going to patch, what can you do to mitigate these sorts of threats? What other technology could you load in these boxes that, with the understanding, hey, this box is going to get popped?
Oh, I know.
What can I do?
I know. HDMI cables with antivirus on them.
Yes, the very special HDMI 1.3
C. 1.3C, yes.
with antivirus capabilities, absolutely. And if you don't know, there is an Xbox cable floating around that on the back quite clearly states that the cable itself has antivirus capabilities for the clearest picture. That's marketing for you kids, right there.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I keep kind of wondering back to the fact of it's inevitable. Boxes are going to get popped. Okay, so how do we defeat that? Or how do we mitigate that? And, there's a lot of technology that's trying to play in that sandbox right now. And I think ultimately I sort of am heading down that thought process of, which I'm contradicting myself right now, but, we patch and we still get popped all the time. Okay. Is this a patch lifecycle issue? Is this, O-days? Is this, whatever? What if we just sort of turn this on the head and say, instead of trying to stop the vulnerabilities, we're just going to stop the exploitation? So it doesn't matter if we have vulnerabilities. We're going to attack at the exploitation point. And when I say attack, I mean mitigate. And there are technologies out there that are supposedly able to do that. But of course, this is always an arms race, right? That is something that the bad guys will then start finding ways around. But, as I've said often on the show, we have to go in with this assumption that we will be compromised. And then how do we detect it and mitigate it very rapidly? It's the only way I know how to do it going forward.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me too is I wonder, and I've not really seen great metrics on this, but what is the spread between compromises that arise as the result of exploitation versus simple garden variety malware that people voluntarily install? Because you're not, what we're talking about here is really protecting against the former and not the latter.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, I guess my where I'm going is we can come up with a really, really good system that mitigates exploitation, kind of like, maybe EMET on steroids, right? But, if people can still click on something and install malware to be able to see, Saddam Hussein's getting hanged, then...
Oh, really? Do you get a link for that?
Whatever.
Well, and that leads into another story we're going to talk about tonight, which is local admin rights.
That's right. So, that seems like a great segue. So I do have to say, and I posted on Twitter about this. Andy and I had an awesome discussion last week about this particular story. And I think we went on for like a half hour.
At least. I'm pretty sure we solved most of the world's problems during that discussion.
Yeah. Right, exactly. I mean, we basically came up with the solution, and unfortunately, it wasn't recording. I had done some boneheaded thing and it wasn't recorded. So, yeah, I actually have a backup now. So that is not going to happen anymore.
For the record, for everybody, I even offered to get back online with Jerry and re-record while it was fresh in our mind. But Jerry was committed to falling on the sword.
That's right. I was tired. I wanted to go to bed.
Fair enough.
All right. So,
and the problem is trying to recreate an epic conversation is never as good.
No, that's true.
So we're just going to have to just pretend that we never spoke of this.
We sound bored. That's why.
And start fresh.
All right. So,
anyway,
the story comes from TechWorld.com. The title is "Removing Admin Rights Would Ease 97% of Critical Microsoft Flaws." So, this is we actually talked about the same report last year when the number was 92%. So it's gone up quite a lot. This report is put out by a company called Avecto, who, as you might imagine, makes a product that solves the problem or addresses the problem in some way, shape, or form. But their point is that if you remove admin rights, their claim is that 97% of Windows operating system flaws would be exploitation would not be fruitful. 99.5% of Internet Explorer vulnerabilities exploitation would not be fruitful, and 95% of Microsoft Office vulnerabilities. So obviously that's a pretty good number. And they also pointed out that the number of vulnerabilities was up 63% year over year, which is quite a bit of growth. So,
just on that aside, I always wonder about the number of vulnerabilities and such. I wonder if that means that we're getting more researchers, we're getting better at finding them, or if the code really is less secure. Because we're dealing with a subset of actual real vulnerabilities. We're only talking about the vulnerabilities found and reported, which does not equal vulnerabilities. So there's a whole different economic metric that goes into that.
You're absolutely right. And I think we mentioned this on a couple of other shows. Just take a step back for a second and think about the macro picture here, right? That Microsoft has been putting out Internet Explorer fixes on a monthly basis for years. And in years and years and years. And they continue to have a nonstop train of really highly critical vulnerabilities. And, these are not newly introduced vulnerabilities. For the most part, I'm sure some of them are, but they're not new. Now, there is another aspect to this that probably, that certainly doesn't play into the story here, is that not all of these vulnerabilities are being exploited actively, right? So, what this study did was actually they looked at every one of the vulnerabilities that Microsoft released last year and put it through some kind of a formula and determined whether or not it would have been exploitation that would have been feasible given admin rights or no admin rights. And so that's a different question of, what was being attacked last year. That's a very different question. So got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one that I think bears some level of investigation. In some ways, you could say that a higher level of vulnerabilities is actually a success. We want to find it. The other thing I'm wondering about is for all these patches that have been released for IE, let's pick on IE for a second. You wonder about the economics of it. We were having this debate online with somebody about what is the compelling reason to write secure code? And I was arguing that, in general, the vast majority of folks who are purchasing some piece of software have, frankly, limited interest in security if that trade-off for that security is additional costs or less functionality or less innovation. And the manufacturers themselves are driven by innovation to keep up. So, that being said, if I take a step back and I look at, okay, all the man time put into patching IE, ignoring for a moment the market reality of getting a product out, just looking at the man time, would it have been cheaper for Microsoft to have, if they knew how and could have, that's always a key, written a more secure version of IE than continually patching it? Now, the flip side is you're assuming perfect knowledge on Microsoft's part. They know all their vulnerabilities, which is not true. The bad guys are always out there finding new vulnerabilities for them. So, but it's an interesting thought process, right? How much time and energy is put into patching versus secure coding up front?
It's a really good question. And at the same time, too, there's an economic incentive. It seems like, maybe subtle, that if the software is secure up front, the demand for ongoing maintenance and keeping up with the latest version, I think, starts to become less interesting, less compelling of a business case from a customer perspective. So, I mean, I don't mean to go full crazy on or conspiracy theory there, but I think there is to an extent, there's a business case from a software manufacturer side. You at the end of the day, you need to keep people coming back.
Yeah, that's true. And the market drives their reaction. I don't think this is anything more complicated than that.
Right.
So, but back to the story at hand.
Admin rights. Removing admin rights.
I think this is a clear, obvious example of security versus functionality. Security versus annoyance factor. Security versus capability to get my job done. I take away admin rights from my users. I may save them a whole bunch of malware, but now I'm annoying the hell out of them because they can't install things. So what does that do? That leads to a huge influx of calls to my help desk. And do I have a way of managing that? And what cost is that versus dealing with the malware outbreaks?
Yep.
As well as, it's silly, but is there a morale hit? Is there a competitive hit? Is there, this is like the classic case of security getting in the way of business and then people finding a way to go around it. And by the way, I'm not arguing one way or the other. I've worked in environments with admin rights and without admin rights. I think it's up to the individual company to make that decision point. But this is a very pure, perfect example of this. If you take away admin rights, you're going to probably reduce the productivity to a certain extent and probably annoy your users a great deal, and they probably are going to be finding ways around that. But you lower risk dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's other benefits too. Going back to the discussion we had a little bit ago, if you do remove admin rights, you have the ability, not only do problems like these exploitation issues become mitigated in large measure, but you also start tackling the problem of people installing, the more garden variety, malware that isn't trying to exploit something. So, you have an ability to defend against that as well. So, this is something that I've thought a lot about, and I've been talking with my friend Bob, right, who is trying to help an organization out who does not, who I should say, I said that wrong, who has admin rights, and they're trying to consider taking away those admin rights for their employees. And they don't have Active Directory in their environment. And, that's a really large cost to get in. And, one of the points I brought up to Bob, and I think he already probably knew this, is if you don't have Active Directory already, Active Directory kind of carries with it its own risk.
Yeah, we've talked about this a few times.
Right.
Now, mind you, it also brings with it productivity enhancements, capabilities, everything else. But yeah, huge risk along with that.
So, on the one hand, if you remove admin rights, you can address this particular problem that's raised in this article. You can get some additional benefit of workstation integrity, but on the other side, you have a pretty significant investment in infrastructure and then also in help desk. And now, Bob was telling me that he is talking with some companies like this Avecto, who have other ways of removing admin rights that aren't as clean, I guess, is the best way I can say it.
Well, one thing I was thinking about is for those that do have admin rights, we don't have the concept of sudo in Windows like we do in Unix, which is a really good way to fix this problem. Yeah, you can add third-party packages, I know, but let's just talk base Windows for a second here. I think it makes sense to have, for those folks who need and have been determined to need admin rights for their environment, they should probably be rocking two accounts, one with and one without. So they do most of their normal stuff without, but if they do need to tweak their system, load a package, install something, can't wait for help desk, whatever it is, log out, log back in as admin user, do what they need to do, log back out, log back in as non-admin.
Yeah.
I think makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But that's a pain in the ass. Most folks don't do that. I've not seen that implemented in most places. I'm sure some have, but I just haven't seen it. And that takes a lot of discipline.
Right. I think it also breaks a lot of tools. So a lot of patch management tools and whatnot.
I guess it would depend. I mean, most of the patch management tools are running off a service account in an AD environment.
Right, but we just talked about not having an AD environment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about if you had an AD environment.
Right.
But I can't even conceive of not having an AD environment. That's crazy talk. That's voodoo.
So
it's witchcraft.
So here's another dimension to this. Let's consider the average company that doesn't have admin rights on their, doesn't allow admin rights on their workstations.
And by that, just to back up a second, we mean the average rank and file user. We're not talking about help desk guys.
No, I'm talking about the average company.
No, I know, but when we say without admin rights, we mean
yes,
the average user at their laptop, desktops, whatever, who's just not in IT.
Correct.
That's what we're typically talking about here.
Well, and so you kind of went where I was going to go. Who in an organization like that ends up with admin rights?
Oh, well, help desk guys, network admin, or Windows admin guys, server admins.
Right.
It depends. I mean, we're not even talking about domain admin rights here. We're just talking about individual admin rights.
Correct. Right. And so whose computer is used to transact or interface with some of the most authoritative accounts in the organization.
Right. The highest risk is the IT guy.
Do you see the problem?
Right. So what you're saying is that the ones who are most at risk are also the ones who have the highest privileged accounts and should be even more cautious and examining a better way to handle privileged accounts. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think absolute minimally in an environment like that, IT people, all across the board, should have two accounts, right?
Well, there's also third-party software packages out there that help solve this problem.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not trying to pimp any of them out. I'm just saying that this is not an unknown problem that doesn't have technical solutions.
Right, but I've seen it all too often, though.
No, you're right. And most folks just say, the hell with it. Here, have admin rights. You're bothering me, kid. And that's going to keep biting us in the ass, I think.
Absolutely. So the other thing that happened in the past week, along with this, is that the FFIC, the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, released some guidance. And there were actually two different pieces of guidance, and the recommendations are almost identical. So I'll just focus on the one pertaining to destructive malware. And, the FFIC I've had a lot of personal experience with, and I actually, as a regulatory body, I think they do a very good job relative to other other things that I've seen, and clearly they've been pounding on the drum of least privilege, right? And so they make a point in the up in the very beginning of this statement to say they're not issuing any new guidance, right? But they then go on to explicitly say, "Thou shalt not allow users to have local admin rights," which is one of the first times I've seen this, that kind of codified in a in a requirement like this. So really interesting, and I do wonder, from a banking perspective, if that changes a lot, or if a lot of if most financial institutions already have that codified. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting, and by the way, I think even if you're not in the banking sector, it's probably worth taking a look at. The banking, the FFIC takes a much more risk focused view versus let's say PCI or HIPAA, which tends to be more prescriptive and with sitting inside the box. So anyway,
yeah, it's interesting. Completely off topic, but a lot of agencies and organizations have been publishing a lot of stuff lately. The PCI Council keeps throwing out new documents like every week. They put out one on pet testing like last week or the week before. They just put out one on tokenization. So there's a lot of guidance coming out right now from various regulatory bodies.
Probably for good reason. I think there's been a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
So our last story comes from CSO, and the title is "Employees Have No Qualms in Selling Corporate Passwords."
Those rat bastards.
That's right. So this is a survey by I don't know who it was by. Basically, they found that 1 in 7 of their survey participants would sell their company's password, for as little as $150. That's and this is there's a long history of this kind of thing. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s there was the experiment about chocolate bars, which is referenced in here. But I do want to point out that there's a person named Christopher Friends, who is the director of IT infrastructure at Interfaith Medical, and he said some of the most sane things I've ever seen, which I want to give him kudos, right? But Friends added that it is important to know how rigorous such research is. These surveys tend to interview people who self-select themselves for participation, so they're not representative cross-section. The surveys, often lack proper controls and do not typically try to verify if the user is actually revealing a password.
Shocking.
It makes you wonder how many people just make up a password on the spot for the free chocolate or the few dollars. Holy cow! I just want to say thank you, Chris.
This is right up your alley. This is like the perfect commentary that you love.
Yes.
Because you love picking on these, rightly so. You love to pick apart the methodologies of all these surveys, and I don't blame you. Most of these surveys are to reach a marketing goal, believe it or not.
Oh,
I remember working
absolutely.
for vendors, and they were like, all right, we need to go interview 50 people on the floor at RSA about this stuff so we can put out marketing collateral. I'm like, okay. Excuse me, waitress working on the floor at RSA. Can you answer my survey?
Yep. That's right. It's data. It's data.
Oh my God. Well, kudos to him. I concur.
So,
But let's assume for a moment there's something to be said. There's some kernel of truth in here.
this is another example of people are bad at doing responsible things. They're bad at picking good passwords. They're bad at remembering their passwords. They're, apparently they're willing to sell it for $150 or some price, right? I mean, maybe it's not $150. Maybe it's 500 or 1,000.
But we know passwords have been a weak link for nigh on 20 years. Why are we still using them as an industry?
Hell if I know.
I think this fundamentally comes down to ease of use versus risk.
Obviously.
We could go 2-factor. We could go 3-factor. We could go, as much as I hate to say it, I don't want to do it. We could go biometric. I think biometric has its own problems, and I don't want to. But we choose not to as an industry for most things. We only go to 2-factor when it really, really, really matters.
That's true.
And I think most people have said it's just not executive proof enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I will tell you, I mean, certainly 2-factor would help here, right? Because, unless the person is willing to give away their 2-factor whatever, their smartphone or their key fob or whatever the method of delivery was, which they're probably not going to be willing to do, that particular problem is mitigated.
It'd be worth running another research study on that, comparing the two.
True.
I bet a physical token that you give away would have a much higher barrier than a piece of knowledge.
Well, and especially since if they don't have that, now they have to go, I mean, they can't do their job. Right. And so then that's one thing. The other thing that I was thinking of is kind of going back to the password manager thing, right? If you require, and I'm becoming more and more convinced of this, that we should require just obscenely complex passwords that you have absolutely no hope of ever conceivably remembering. 40 character, completely random, passwords, and, they have to be stored in a password vault. You're not going to...
I'm with you until I have to log into my Windows box in the morning.
Well, but don't you have a password manager?
I do, but I don't have access to it until I log in.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
No, I'm serious. My initial AD login, I have no access to a password manager at that point. As soon as I'm in, I'm completely with you. Right? So
no, I get it. I get you. That's fair.
So I don't disagree. I love the concept of password manager. I use one, and I have very randomized, individual, unique passwords for all of my sites, which is great. Until, by the way, we go back to single sign-on again back in the corporate environment, and then link it all back to AD.
Yeah, and then you're signing with the same password
over and over and over. Why? Because it's convenient.
Yep. Well, that's a good point.
So this is not a technology problem. This is an ease of use problem.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think RSA probably nailed this properly in the beginning. A little token with a rotating 60-second code that you have a 4-digit or 8-digit code that you pair with it, and that's your password, and it's good for that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously that has evolved a bit, and we've got everybody else and their brother emulating various different takes on that. But at the end of the day, I think that is probably pretty decent.
It's simple. Yeah, it's simple and understandable.
And if you're curious, the reason why I'm never going to support biometric is because at the end of the day, biometric for most applications can be transmitted over the network, which means it's now been turned into a digital artifact. And as soon as I can replay that digital artifact, I'm doomed, because guess what? I cannot change whatever my biometric marker is. I can always change my password.
Yeah.
So as soon as my biometric is compromised, I'm permanently screwed.
Right. And things like thumbprints, you leave everywhere.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be very practical right now, but it's been proven practical to do fake fingerprints. So
yeah.
And
yeah. I use the thumbprint or fingerprint scanner on my iPhone 6, but what I like about it is it's local, it's not being transmitted, it's the right level of usability versus risk. But I think we need to be very careful about biometrics. Everybody thinks it's a perfect, sexy solution, and I think it's fraught with peril.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to point out that there's a crazy reference to a wacky website in here. I was reading this, and I got down. It's like 3/4 of the way down, and I'm reading, and the website Malicious Link in a recent post argued that enterprises need to understand the psychology of employees and provide incentives for them not to be tempted to sell their credentials. And when I read that, I got very angry because I thought somebody else created a website called Malicious Link. Well, it turns out it's mine. So it's very funny. Anyway,
See, this is why you shouldn't be doing vodka shots for breakfast.
Clearly. Anyway, there's a link to the blog post I wrote. Basically, my point was, I've talked a lot about behavioral economics, and I really think that we've got a lot to learn about from an InfoSec perspective about psychology. And this is I think this whole story is kind of a an indication of some limitations of people, and that we've got to structure our programs in such a manner. And by the way, that's not necessarily always technical. Like I said in my post, that sometimes it's incentives.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I invite you to read it. I think that will do it for this week's episode.
Indeed.
So we definitely appreciate you listening. You can find links to all the stories we talked about on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. And if you enjoyed this podcast, tell a friend, give us some feedback on iTunes. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter at Lurg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. Hey, how about that, huh? And with that, we'll talk again next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for listening, as always.
Thanks. Take care. Bye. That would be annoying.
And it would disrupt my carefully cultivated podcasting professionalism.
Is that what we call it now? Mm-hmm.
It's true. It's true. I've been working for years on this level of professional. I try to make it look effortless and easy, but believe me, it takes hours.
It's like the
warm up.
It's like the duck,
research.
Right? The duck on the water, right?
I mean, I don't want to give away my secrets, but
no, I get it.
I still get the pre-show bulimia, but I think I'm ready.
Get the jitters.
Well, I just puke a few times.
Oh, then you're good.
Yeah. It's
got it.
It makes me nervous talking to like 7 people. So I gotta,
Totally.
I do a little meth, I puke, do a little coke, and I'm good.
It's like your thing. It's like a pitcher that touches their hat 3 times, right?
It's true. And then apparently I have some ginger ale, which is apparently the thing.
Nice. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.